Hello everybody, my name is Oscar, and welcome to the Kidstar's Story Corner. Today's story is by Andrea Beatty and Pascal Lemaitre, and it's called Dr. Ted. One morning, Ted woke up, got out of bed, and bumped his knee. That's not good, thought Ted. I need a doctor. He looked everywhere, but he couldn't find one. And since Ted couldn't find a doctor, he became a doctor. Now, Dr. Ted didn't have an office, so he made one. Dr. Ted didn't have a big bandage, so he made one of those too. Now, all I need is a patient, he thought. So he waited for one to arrive. He waited. And he waited. And he waited. Nice waiting room, thought Dr. Ted. And then he waited some more. I think it's time for our house call, he thought. Hello, he called. Dr. Ted's mother was in the kitchen. You have measles, said Dr. Ted. We should operate. Those are my freckles, said his mother. Come on, it's time for breakfast. At school, Dr. Ted sat in the third row of Mrs. Johnson's class. All round him, children coughed, sniffled, and sneezed. Dr. Ted smiled. Patients, he thought. The patients were very germy. At lunchtime, Dr. Ted took their temperatures and their blood pressure. He gave them good medical advice, and they were very grateful. Dr. Ted was such a good doctor that even Mrs. Johnson came to see him. You can't be a doctor in the canteen, she said. You have mumps, said Dr. Ted. Crutches could help. Those are my cheeks, said Mrs. Johnson. Come on, it's time for lunch. Head teacher Bigham walked in. Dr. Ted could tell he was very sick. He needed a doctor. We already have a school doctor who visits on Fridays, said head teacher Bigham with a smile. You have gingivitis, said Dr. Ted. You need a full body cast. Head teacher Bigham frowned. Oh, you also have bad breath, said Dr. Ted. You need an injection. The head teacher's face turned bright red. And a fever, said Dr. Ted. You need a transplant. We already have a school doctor. Head teacher Bigham pointed towards the door. Oh, we could do something about those smelly feet, said Dr. Ted. Go home, said head teacher Bigham. Dr. Ted was very sad. He packed up his big bandage and went home. That night, he took 2 biscuits and went straight to bed. The next day, at break time, Ted sat on a bench and sighed. He watched Frances Sylvester do gymnastics on the monkey bars. She was very talented. Everyone thought so, especially Mrs. Johnson and head teacher Bigham. Frances finished her routine with a triple twisting somersault. She landed on Mrs. Johnson. Ouch! Cried Mrs. Johnson. My ankle! Head teacher Bigham ran this way and that. Help! He called. Call an ambulance! Call the fire brigade! Call the library!
somebody!
But Dr. Ted was already there. He wrapped Mrs. Johnson's ankle with his big bandage. He checked her vision and her tonsils. "Take 2 biscuits," he said. "You'll feel better in the morning." Just then, the ambulance arrived, and the fire brigade, and the librarians. "It's a good thing you had Dr. Ted," they all said. "There's always room for another school doctor," said Mrs. Johnson. "My work here is done," said Dr. Ted. "Keep the bandage." Head teacher Bigham's face turned bright red. "You really should do something about that fever," said Dr. Ted. That night, Dr. Ted closed his office, packed away his stethoscope, and went to sleep, knowing he'd done a good job. The next morning, Ted woke up, got out of bed, and sniffed the air. It smelled like burnt toast. "That's not good," thought Ted. "I need a fire engine." And that story was called Dr. Ted. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you next time I'm in the story corner. Until then, take care. And cheerio.